I call on the Honorable Minister of Financial Services to grace us with prayers.
Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all of the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Premier, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the Leader of the Opposition, Ministers of Cabinet, ex officio members, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us pray the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace, now and always. Amen.
Please be seated. Proceedings are resumed. Chris.
Administration of oaths or affirmations.
None.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of Messages and Announcements.
Thank you. Honourable members, I thought for certain this Honourable House had gotten past this LBGT issue. But this morning, the elected member for Northside made reference to a word made here by another member yesterday. And the member for Northside did say that in my role as Speaker, I should have controlled and addressed that kind of decorum. He went on to say, and in the relationship he has with the Speaker, he wouldn't have gotten away with it. Why personalize it? Let me say, I didn't hear the word when it was said. I saw members smiling. I thought he had too. And I thought it was a fraudulent slip or a slip of the tongue. Members usually smile at that kind of levity. It was in the members' room that I learned what the word was. I don't know how or why the member for Northside feels that it is not in keeping with the decorum expected of the House. That word, as I understand it, that was used, is used in the LGBT community. They advertise it. Honorable members, I have made my position very clear, and I ain't about to rehash it. My conscience is very clear on my stand. We have more serious issues now to deal with. We have gotten past some. I don't expect honorable members to keep going on the radio to rehash it. The member for Northside, I think, would have used that time better to explain his constitutional position, and one that I have to consider as presiding officer responsible for nomenclature in this assembly. I should be referring to him as the leader of the opposition, but how can I when I know he has no support to speak for the so-called opposition, the very support that made him the leader of the opposition? I thought that's what he should have dealt with. As Speaker, I have tried to be as judicious as I possibly can and also give reasonable latitude to members when necessary or required. It is my intention to continue to keep doing that and advocate for the desirable decorum this House demands and urge members, all of us, to be respectful and show deference to each other and this Honourable House at all times. So, the member from North Side, if he wants the House to be in that kind of attitude, well, lead the way, but lead it from the front. Seems like, in some instances, some urge me to act, but when it applies to anyone personally, they don't want me to impose or intervene with a rule. Honourable members, we have passed this. I am saying it is time. Leave it as is. There are appeals in front of us. There is no need for us to take it further. Mind you, we are under attack. That's my position. But we know how to deal with that. And when it comes to facts, members are going to have to stick to the fact, whether they go on radio or whether they come here. That is my job to do, is to deal with matters factually, on principle, and in truth.
Presentation of petitions.
I know that the note that the member for Georgetown is rising. He had spoken to me about a petition. I have not heard anything else about it. So, member, you are rising.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising under Standing Order 15.1 and 2 to present a petition to this Honourable House.
Honourable member, I would not want to block anything, any work that any member is doing, but I think Standing Order 16, I think I'm instructed here, says, no petition shall be presented to the House unless it has been endorsed by the clerk as being in accordance with the following rules. And as members can see from their standing orders, as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 points to consider. And we will have to take some time to go through that, and we have to continue with business at any point in the day or at a given point in the day when it might be appropriate, because the government has a lot of business here today. Then we will look at it, Honourable Member.
Presentation of papers and of reports. Report. Report of the Standing Business Committee, second meeting of the 2018-2019 session of the Legislative Assembly. Report of the Standing Business Committee, third meeting of the 2018-2019 session of the Legislative Assembly, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Premier, Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs.
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the report of the Standing Business Committee for the second meeting of the 2018-2019 session of the Legislative Assembly and the report for the third meeting of the 2018-2019 session of the Legislative Assembly.
So ordered. Is the Honorable Premier speaking there too?
No, thank you, sir.
(2020) Strategic Policy Statement, Government of the Cayman Islands, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
The Honorable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the government, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the 2020 Strategic Policy Statement.
So ordered. Is the member speaking there too at this time or later?
I'll speak to the statement at this time, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, it is my honour to rise today and speak to the government's 2020 Strategic Policy Statement, hereinafter referred to as the SPS. Mr. Speaker, the government's 2020 SPS outlines government's fiscal plans, policy priorities, and broad strategic outcomes for the next 3 financial years, which will cover the period from 1st of January 2020 to 31st of December 2022. This SPS will also guide the development of the detailed budget for the next budget period, consisting of 2 financial years, 1st of January to 31st of December 2020 and 1st of January to 31st of December 2021. This budget will be brought to this Honourable Legislative Assembly in the latter part of this year. Mr. Speaker, this SPS is the second one produced since we changed to a 2-year budgeting cycle, and it will be the last SPS by this administration before the next general elections to be held in 2021. Mr. Speaker, I begin by focusing and speaking first of the government's fiscal strategy. The government remains committed to a fiscal strategy that is centered on the following key principles: compliance with the principles of responsible financial management, in particular, achieving substantial surpluses each year, no new fees or taxes levied on the public, and no new borrowings. This SPS builds on these central guiding fiscal policy objectives for the management of the government's finances over the forecast period. Looking now at the compliance with the principles of responsible financial management, managing the government's operating expenditure in a way that maintains healthy operating surpluses remains a critical component of our financial management strategy. By managing our finances in this manner, the government is able to use the cash generated by these surpluses to steadily reduce debt, fund its capital investment program, and maintain cash reserves well above the minimum required by the principles of responsible financial management and the framework for fiscal responsibility set out in the Public Management and Finance Law, or PMFL. This element of our strategy is key to ensuring the long-term fiscal sustainability. It clearly demonstrates our commitment to being prudent stewards of the government's finances. No new fees or taxes levied on the public. As with the last SPS, government has made the conscious decision not to seek to introduce any new coercive revenue measures in the medium term in an effort to keep the tax burden, cost of living, and cost of doing business as low as possible. This will build confidence, give certainty to the private sector to continue making investments that will stimulate economic activity and employment opportunities. And third, Mr. Speaker, no new borrowings. During the SPS period, barring any major catastrophes or economic disruptions, government does not intend to incur any new borrowings. We plan to fund all of our operating expenditure and capital investments from cash generated from our operations and existing cash reserves. In fact, the government is planning to reduce public sector debt by a further $104 million during the forecast period. And Mr. Speaker, this will bring the government's public debt to the lowest level in more than 20 years. Turning my attention now to some of the more broad strategic objectives, Mr. Speaker. In addition to our fiscal strategy, this SPS is built on the 8 broad strategic outcomes which the government has agreed will guide our policy actions over this term. These outcomes are, in no particular order, a strong economy to help families and businesses, achieving full employment, jobs for all Caymanians, the best education opportunities for all our children, reducing crime and the fear of crime, access to quality, affordable health care, stronger communities and support for the most vulnerable, ensuring Caymanians benefit from a healthy environment, and stable, effective, and accountable government. Turning next to our economic forecasts. Mr. Speaker, this government remains committed to ensuring that our economy continues to grow in a stable and sustainable way that ensures maximum opportunities for Caymanians. We will continue with the major economic policy interventions introduced during the last administration, such as the reduced import duties, lower business licensing fees, development concessions, and extended support to small businesses. Over the next 3 financial years, the Economics and Statistics Office has forecast that our economy will grow at steady and healthy rates, in line with the forecast for the world's major economies, who are the source markets for our major economic pillars. Economic growth, as measured by the real gross domestic product, is expected to grow by 2.2% in 2020, 2.1% in 2021, and 2% in 2022. These forecasts are underpinned by the assumption that the 3 key sectors of the Cayman Islands economy, financial services, tourism, and business services, will all continue to evolve and maintain their global competitiveness. Economic growth, led by the construction sector, will be directly influenced by several large construction projects from the private and public sectors, including new hotel construction in Grand Cayman, completion of the new John Gray High School, development of the cruise and cargo ports in Georgetown, construction of the long-term residential mental health facility, and implementation of the new integrated solid waste management system. Over the next 3 years, economic growth will create additional jobs and is expected to keep the unemployment rate below 4%. Unemployment rates are forecast to be 3.5% in 2020, 3.6% in 2021, and 3.8% in 2022. Economic growth and increased levels of employment mean that the consumption of goods and services will increase. This, in turn, places upward pressure on the rate of inflation that is expected to increase by 2.2% in 2020, 2.2% in 2021, and the same amount in 2022. In order to manage and help manage the impact of inflation, government has taken the decision to leave in place the significant import duty reductions implemented in the last administration, most notably reduced import duty of 25 cents per gallon, down from 75 cents per gallon on fuel used by CUC for the generation of electricity, reduced import duty of 20%, down from 22%, for licensed traders on consumer goods for retail sale, and a reduced import duty of 15% on building materials. By keeping in place these import duty reductions, the government is doing its part to keeping retail prices as low as possible, thereby keeping the cost of living for households and the cost of doing business as low as possible. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight the financial forecasts that are contained within the SPS document just tabled. The government's main revenue streams are directly tied to the level of consumption and rate of economic growth. As the economy grows, so do government's revenues. In line with that overall fiscal strategy, the government has no plans to introduce any new coercive revenue measures during the next 3 financial years. We will continue to pursue the implementation of enhanced business processes to improve the efficiency of revenue collection and the annual intake from the existing suite of revenue measures. Mr. Speaker, the SPS forecasts that the government's revenues will be approximately $829.1 million in 2020, $851 million in 2021, and $836.9 million in 2022. Now, these forecasts, Mr. Speaker, include one-off transfers to general revenues from cash assets of liquidated entities, which are forecast to be $33.7 million in 2020, $33.9 million in 2021, and $6.7 million in 2022. Mr. Speaker, government's expenditures are inextricably tied to the growth of our economy and population. As they grow too, so do the demands for government services. Our main goal is to manage our expenses in a sustainable manner that allows us to effectively deliver our services to the high standard expected. In line with this fiscal strategy, we are committed to keeping our operating expenditures well below operating revenues. Over the SPS period, government will seek to limit growth in operating expenditures while simultaneously pursuing operational efficiencies to reduce costs or limit growth in costs wherever possible. Core government operating expenditures are forecast to be $734.2 million in 2020, $741.7 million in 2021, and $746.8 million in 2022. Over the SPS period, increased operating expenditure will be used to fund a number of important initiatives, including, but not limited to, improving safety and security through enhanced community policing and border security, delivering better management of labor markets through the new Department of Workforce Opportunities and Residency Cayman, reforming our social assistance programs to ensure that the right persons get the right benefits at the right time, establishing a new ministry to foster international relations and promote foreign investment in the Cayman Islands, enhancing tourism marketing to high-value source markets and continued implementation of the National Tourism Plan, enhancing financial services policy functions and the regulatory services provided by the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority in response to the ever-evolving international regulatory changes, continuing to develop and implement enhanced information technology services, including improved cybersecurity and e-commerce, e-government initiatives, continued enhancement of teaching and learning in schools with a focus on increasing the use of online and computerized testing and strengthening core curriculum across primary and secondary schools. Implementing this integrated solid waste management system, conducting the comprehensive population and housing census in 2020, commencement of operations of the new long-term residential mental health facility, and the preparation and execution of the 2021 general elections. Looking next, Mr. Speaker, at capital investment forecasts. Mr. Speaker, over the SPS period, planned public sector capital investments are forecast to total some $383.4 million and will be spread over the 3 years as follows: $177.7 million in 2020, $126.4 million in 2021, and $79.3 million in 2022. These investments will fund debt servicing obligations and operations of our statutory authorities and government companies, as well as the development of key infrastructure by the core government, such as 1, the completion of the John Gray High School and upgrades to other key school infrastructure, addressing the major traffic issues from eastern districts by extending the east-west arterial and offer other key upgrades to the roads network, remediation of the Georgetown landfill and implementation of the integrated solid waste management system, and construction of a long-term residential mental health facility. Turning next, Mr. Speaker, to compliance with the principles of responsible financial management. Mr. Speaker, maintaining compliance with the principles of responsible financial management is another core element of this government's fiscal strategy. For the next 3 financial years, we are forecasting that government will maintain compliance with those principles. Let me speak now to each of them. Operating surplus. The PMFL requires that government maintain a positive operating surplus. And over the next 3 years, core government is forecast to remain in compliance with this requirement, with the core government's operating surpluses forecast to be $94.9 million in 2020, $109.2 million in 2021, and $90.1 million in 2022. These surpluses are critical to generating cash to pay off debt, maintain cash reserves, and fund capital investments in both core government and or SAGCs, or statutory authorities and government companies. Over the SPS period, our SAGCs combined are forecast to record a small net surplus of $0.795 million in 2020 and net losses of $1.2 million in 2021 and $1.8 million in 2022. Debt service ratio. PMFL requires that the annual entire public sector debt service costs, interest and principal, not be greater than 10% of core government revenues. The SPS forecast indicates that the government will be well below this limit, with the debt service ratio forecast to be 6.8% in 2020, 6.2% in 2021, and 6.1% in 2022. This ratio will be at its lowest level too in many, many years. This means that more of government's revenues will be available to fund the demands for services or capital projects that the government wishes to undertake. Net debt ratio. The PMFL requires that the government's net debt not exceed 80% of core government's operating revenues. Net debt is calculated as the total amount of outstanding core government debt plus the risk-weighted debt of SAGCs less the liquid assets of the core government. Government is forecast to be in full compliance with this requirement over the 3 financial years, with net debt ratio forecast to be 3.8% in 2020, 0.3% in 2021, and negative 5.5% in 2022, as core government cash balances will exceed debt balances of the entire public sector. Mr. Speaker, a very enviable position to be in for a government. This significant reduction places government well below the maximum allowed limit of 80% and is consistent with our overall strategy of debt reduction and no new incremental borrowing. Cash reserves. The PMFL requires the government have liquid cash reserves of not less than 90 days of estimated executive expenses. This ratio is calculated at the point in the financial year when government's liquid cash reserves are expected to be at their lowest point. Typically, this is 31st of December in each year. Over the period, government is forecast to maintain full compliance with this principle, as allowable liquid cash reserves for the purpose of the ratio calculation are expected to be 241 million or 119.9 days in 2020, 231 million or 113.7 days in 2021, and $241.4 million or 118 days in 2020. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the 2020 Strategic Policy Statement provides a strategic overview of the government's financial resources and how they are likely to be allocated over the next 3 years to fund necessary programs or to progress our key policy initiatives. We will provide continued support of Cayman's financial services industry and direct representation of the Cayman Islands on the global financial stage. We will provide support for the continued development of our vital tourism industry. We will provide increased employment opportunities for all Caymanians. We will reform our social assistance programs to ensure we are providing appropriate help to the right people. We will invest in our youth through the completion of the John Gray High School, upgrades to other key education infrastructure, and the implementation of enhanced curriculum and other education services. And we will implement the integrated solid waste management system, and we will make further improvements to our road network infrastructure. Our government remains steadfast and relentless in its commitment to improve the quality of life for all Caymanians, whilst balancing the need to manage the country's finances in a prudent and responsible manner. This SBS clearly demonstrates that government continues to exercise good stewardship in its management of the fiscal affairs of this paradise we all call our home. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Clerk.
CIDB, Cayman Islands Development Bank Annual Report for the 18-month ended December 31st, 2017, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
Honorable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the annual report of the Cayman Islands Development Bank for the 18-month period ended December 31, 2017.
So ordered. Is the member going to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few comments from me. Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Auditor General issued an unmodified opinion with an emphasis of matter on the financial statements of the CIDB for the 18-month period ended the 31st of December 2017. The emphasis of matter relates to the following matters: the CIDB being significantly reliant on the continued support of the government from the proceeds of capital injections and services in order to meet its obligations and operational expenditures, and 51% or 14.7 million, including allowances for credit losses of the overall loan portfolio of the CIDB being impaired. Mr. Speaker, the CIDB's loan portfolio totaled 29.1 million prior to a loan loss provision of 3.6 million. As discussed in Note 5 to the financial statements, the majority of the loan portfolio was for mortgages, equivalent to 10.5 million, business loans, 6.5 million, and debt consolidation, 4.9 million. During the 18-month period, the CIDB approved 73 loans totaling 1.3 million. Of these loans, 66 or 90% of the loans were for debt consolidation and student loans. The debt consolidation loans were to assist civil and public servants with liquidating other high interest rate debt. Assets totaled 44.5 million at the 31st of December 2017, of which 25.5 million or 57% comprised the loan portfolio to customers. As disclosed in Note 13 to the financial statements, Mr. Speaker, liabilities totaled 28.8 million, of which 24.3 million or 84% was related to long-term debt. CIDB incurred a net loss of 0.7 million after 1.5 million in net income from operations and incurring 2.2 million of administration expenses. Mr. Speaker, the CIDB ended the 18-month period with 12.8 million in cash, which is comprised of cash held in current and savings accounts, fixed deposits, and on behalf of the Young Nation Builders Scholarship Fund and the Education Council Scholarship Fund. With respect to the Education Council Scholarship Fund, Mr. Speaker, the CIDB acts as an agent for the government and received 0.7 million for providing the scholarship services as outlined in the 2016-17 purchase agreement between the CIDB and the government. The CIDB has no known contingent liabilities as of the 31st of December 2017. On behalf of the government, I express our gratitude to the directors and staff of the CIDB for all of their efforts during the 2017 fiscal year, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, Cayman Islands Annual Report, 31st of December 2018, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have to say this with some delight. I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the annual report and audited financial statements of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development for the year ended the 31st of December 2018.
I'm sure the minister speaking there too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will. I will exercise my privilege. Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Auditor General issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements of the Ministry for the year ended the 31st of December 2018. The unmodified opinion signifies that the information contained in the financial statements is materially correct and it can be relied upon. As shown on pages 5 to 6 of the annual report, during the 12-month period ended the 31st of December 2018, the Ministry comprised of 315 staff members, of which 291, or 92%, are Caymanian. 58% of the staff members are female, and the majority of the staff are 41 years and older. Mr. Speaker, some of the Ministry's key events and achievements during the 2018 financial year included the Economic and Statistics Office completing the Occupational Wage Survey, which, Mr. Speaker, will be tabled shortly in this Honourable House and contains a wealth of information on the monthly basic earnings and total compensation of some 19,215 employees in the Cayman Islands. Second, the release of the Labour Force Survey Spring 2018 report, which presented the population in the Cayman Islands as of the end of June 2018 at 64,420, the labour force at 44,213 persons, and an unemployment rate of 3.4%. Tabling of the 2016-17 supplementary budget in this Honourable Legislative Assembly, the gazettal of the government's very first unaudited quarterly report covering the financial period 1st of January to 31st of March 2018. This was an important step in the government's efforts to improve the timeliness of reporting its financial results and position to members of this Legislative Assembly and the public. And Mr. Speaker, I would add that the financial reports for the second and third quarters were also presented on a timely manner to this Honourable Legislative Assembly as well. Fifth, delivering training related to the new procurement law and regulations, as well as the use of the Cayman Islands procurement portal Bonfire to over 500 civil servants. 1,900 vendors are now registered on the electronic procurement portal, and the Customs Department contributing to the arrest of some 80 persons and seizing more than 6.77 pounds of cocaine, 500 pounds of ganja, and 5 firearms. Mr. Speaker, the Statement of Executive Financial Transactions shows that on behalf of the Cabinet, the Ministry collected $228.5 million in executive revenues, which was $31.1 million or 16% more than budget. The primary reasons for the overachievement was due to an increase in the number and value of imported vehicles, an increase in the demand for alcoholic beverages, and an increase in the quantity and value of other cargo imports. On behalf of the Cabinet, the Ministry incurred $56.9 million in executive expenditures, which was $1.1 million or 2% more than budget. The primary reason for the net over expenditure was due to the government having to provide the Cayman Islands National Insurance Company, Synico, with additional funding in order to maintain the prescribed capital requirement as required by the Insurance, Capital and Insolvency Class A Insurers Regulations 2012 and the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. The Statement of Financial Position shows that the Ministry ended the financial period with $26.9 million in total assets. Of this amount, $14 million or 52% is cash and cash equivalents, which includes cash on hand, cash in transit, and bank accounts and deposits with a maturity of no more than 3 months. Total liabilities amounted to $6.3 million, the majority of which comprise a $3.8 million surplus payable to the Cabinet that represents the surplus earned during the financial period and which will be repaid to the Cabinet during the 2019 financial year. Net assets, which are total assets less total liabilities, amounted to $20.7 million. The Statement of Financial Performance shows that the Ministry earned $30.4 million in revenue for the period. Most of this revenue was earned from the delivery of outputs to Cabinet and administrative fees and other user charges levied on the public for the delivery of services. The Ministry incurred $26.6 million in expenses during the financial period, of which $20.5 million or 77%, comprise personnel costs. Personnel costs include salaries, health insurance, and pension costs. The ministry achieved an operating surplus of $3.8 million. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the annual report will clearly demonstrate that the ministry has worked hard this past year to provide effective, efficient, and outstanding public service that represent value for money and contribute to the prosperity and productivity of the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, I am proud of the fact that my ministry continues to lead by example. Mr. Speaker, we were the first to submit our financial statements to the Auditor General for audit. That was accomplished on the 25th day of January of this year. We were the first entity to complete an audit. Auditor General signed off her opinion on the 15th day of March. Had we been in session as we had originally intended in March, I would have tabled this report at that time. Nevertheless, we are still the first to table the annual report and audited financial statements in this honorable House as required by law, well ahead of all statutory deadlines. And so this morning, Mr. Speaker, I wish to congratulate and thank the staff of the ministry and the Office of the Auditor General for their diligence in completing this annual process on a timely basis. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the staff and management of the ministry for all their efforts and the hard work during the 2018 financial year. And I look forward to future successes in the years to come. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Government of the Cayman Islands, Ministry of Financial Services and Home Affairs, financial statements for the 18-month period ended 31st of December 2017, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Financial Services and Home Affairs.
The Honorable the Minister of Financial Services.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this honourable House the annual financial statements for the period, 18-month period, ended December 31st, 2017.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking there too?
I'll speak to both the report and the financial statements after I table the annual report.
Ministry of Financial Services and Home Affairs, Cayman Islands Government, Fiscal 2016-2017 Annual Report, 1st of July 2016 to the 31st of December 2017, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Financial Services and Home Affairs.
Honorable Minister of Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this honourable House the Fiscal 2016-2017 Annual Report of the Ministry of Financial Services and Home Affairs.
So ordered. Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dealing first with the annual report, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to present the annual report for the Ministry of Financial Services and Home Affairs. This annual report goes beyond the financial statements and provides details into the activities and accomplishments for the 2016-2017 financial year. Mr. Speaker, focusing first on the work of financial services. The work of the ministry has a major impact on our economy, Mr. Speaker, and this report provides a summary of this impact. Mr. Speaker, in 2016, an estimated 51.5% of Cayman's GDP was generated by the financial and insurance industries, and that combined with the activities of the legal and accounting professions. Mr. Speaker, in 2017, these sectors accounted for 16.8% of total employment. Mr. Speaker, please permit me to mention several significant achievements during the 2016-2017 year. The Cayman Islands maintained its largely compliant rating from the OECD's Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes, following an on-site assessment in January 2017. Mr. Speaker, over 23 laws and regulations were developed and passed during the period, largely as part of the preparation for the jurisdiction's on-site inspection by the CFATF against international anti-money laundering and countering of financing of terrorism standards in December 2017. Mr. Speaker, the government successfully demonstrated the jurisdiction's level of transparency and international cooperation in response to concerns raised within the European Union and avoided being placed on the blacklist of non-cooperative jurisdictions published in December 2017. Turning now to Home Affairs, Mr. Speaker, the work of the Ministry and the related departments play an important role in helping to create and promote a safer and more secure society. A short summary of the activities during the 2016-2017 year, Mr. Speaker, some of the significant achievements are as follows. The probation officer's caseload at the Department of Community Rehabilitation continued to grow over the period as the demands increased for all services offered. A service level agreement was signed in late March 2017 between the Department of Community Rehabilitation and Her Majesty's Cayman Islands Prison Service. And Mr. Speaker, as of September 2017, all sentenced prisoners had in fact been assigned to a probation officer while in prison. The average number of prisoners held in secure custody was 216 for the year. The total of 114 prisoners were involved in the release on temporary license scheme, 2 of which were discharged and were in employment at the location that they participated in the release on temporary license. Mr. Speaker, a number of incidents responded to by the fire service was at a record of 2,707 incidents for the period. There were 17 new recruits in 2017, as well as a number of improvements to facilities and purchases of new equipment and vehicles. Mr. Speaker, there were 57,189 calls to the 911 system operated by the Department of Public Safety and Communications, with 98% of the calls being answered within 10 seconds. The Electronic Monitoring Center monitored an average of 38 separate offenders during each month in the fiscal year of 16-17. The 2017 Atlantic hurricane season, Mr. Speaker, was an extremely active season, featuring 17 named storms, 6 of which became major hurricanes, Category 3 or above. However, Mr. Speaker, once again, the Cayman Islands was spared from significant impacts. The director of HMCI and one of the deputies were deployed to Anguilla and BVI, respectively, to provide much-needed on-the-ground expertise in disaster response and recovery in our sister overseas territories. Mr. Speaker, a contract for the island's new radio telecommunications system was signed in December 2017. Turning now to the audited financial statements, Mr. Speaker, just tabled for the Ministry of Financial Services and Home Affairs. These statements are comprised of the Statement of Financial Position, the Statement of Financial Performance, the Statement of Changes in Net Worth, the Statement of Cash Flows, and the notes to the financial statements. Mr. Speaker, the Statement of Financial Performance will show that the total revenue earned by the Ministry was CI 35.9 million. Total expenses were 34.6 million during 2016-2017 financial year, and the surplus for the period was 1.3 million. The Ministry ended the 2016-2017 financial year with 39.3 million in total assets, 6.7 million in total liabilities, and total net worth of 32.6 million. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General issued an unqualified opinion on the financial statements of the Ministry for the year ended 31st December 2017. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
(2016-2017) Annual Report of the Standing Select Committee to oversee the performance of the Office of the Ombudsman.
Honorable the Minister of Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on this honourable, on the table in this honourable House, the 2017-2018 Annual Report of the Standing Select Committee to oversee the performance of the Office of the Ombudsman.
So ordered. Is the minister speaking?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Office of the Ombudsman 2017 Annual Report, 13th of September 2017 to the 31st of December 2017, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Financial Services and Home Affairs.
The Honorable the Minister of Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House on behalf of the Oversight Committee the Office of the Ombudsman's 2017 Annual Report.
So ordered. Is the minister speaking?
Mr. Speaker, the report speaks for itself.
Information Commissioner's Office Annual Report, 1st of July 2016 to the 12th of September 2017, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Financial Services and Home Affairs.
The Honorable the Minister of Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the Information Commissioner's Office Annual Report, 1st of July 2016 to the 12th of September 2017.
So ordered. Is the minister speaking?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Office of the Complaints Commissioner Annual Report 2016-2017, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Financial Services and Home Affairs.
The Honorable the Minister of Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the Office of the Complaints Commissioner Annual Report 2016-2017.
So ordered. Is the minister speaking?
No, Mr. Speaker, just to say that the reports
Thank you.
speak for themselves.
Questions to Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet. The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honourable Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure. Question number 55.
The elected member for Georgetown Central. Question number 55.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask questions standing in my name on the order paper. Can the Honourable Minister say what the procedures of notification to residents are when a new road is being installed?
The Honourable Minister of Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for the question. The answer is, Mr. Speaker, under the Roads Law 2005 revision, there are 3 distinct stages to the creation of a new road. If it is determined that a road is needed for an area, or if an existing road needs to be widened, the scope of the intervention must be described in the form of a boundary plan, or a BP. This plan and the subsequent declarations must be approved by Cabinet upon the recommendation of the National Roads Authority, the NRA. Mr. Speaker, this plan indicates the proposed location of the roadworks over the parcels of land affected by the proposed scheme and the proposed amount of land to be taken from each landowner. Mr. Speaker, 2 declaration notices are then made to the public via the Gazette, the newspaper, and to the landowners directly via registered mail. The first is called a Section 3 notice, which is an intent to acquire the land by the NRA that is needed to build the road. Mr. Speaker, the second publication, called a Section 6 notice, is a notification stating that the NRA, under the Roads Law 2005 revision, has been granted permission to enter the land 15 days from the Gazette date of the notice so that road construction can begin as outlined in the BP drawing. Mr. Speaker, after the new road is built, an as-built survey is undertaken called a prescribed composite map and delineates the exact location of the road and documents more precisely the amount of land taken from each owner by the scheme. Mr. Speaker, to initiate this stage, a declaration notice is made under Section 5 of the Roads Law 2005 revision, which classifies the road as a public road and also publicly declares the road scheme as completed by publishing the notice in the Gazette and newspaper. At this stage, the Department of Lands and Survey also issues letters to all affected landowners from whom the land was taken. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr.
A
Speaker.
member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you allow me a minor preamble just to give the Minister understanding to my line of questioning. The Minister may be aware of the new roundabout just at the end of Printer's Way that has created much newsworthy attention in respect to the closeness of the home to the road. Can the Minister say if property owners can object to roads or the plans for a road and how it's planned if their land itself is not being affected but their environment is being changed tremendously?
The Honorable the Minister of Commerce.
Mr. Speaker, thank the member for that. Mr. Speaker, under the Roads Law 2005 revision, only those individuals from whom land is actually taken are allowed to make a claim for compensation under the law. Mr. Speaker, it's also clearly understood that there are cases, such as the member brought up, where the proximity of a new road can have an adverse effect on an adjoining property, and presently there is no legal recourse for that individual. The Ministry, in conjunction with other relevant ministries and the National Roads Authority, are presently reviewing the roads law and will be looking at the incorporation of this issue into the claims process, amongst others.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Minister for the answer. I think maybe I wasn't clear with my question in respect to objection, not necessarily claims for compensation. So, for example, in this case, if the homeowner had saw the plans being so close to their home, could they have had the opportunity to object or ask for changes to those plans so we won't be in the situation they were in now where there may be a claim for compensation?
The Honorable the Minister for Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is no, when the NRA gazettes a road in the interest to build a road, they have several ways in which they can do that. What we have been doing, and unfortunately this did not happen in the circumstance the member's talking about, is that the ministry have been over, when they did, in particular did the Linford Pearson Highway, contacting the landowners and discussing it with them. This is something that we are actually now writing in policy, that in future roads such as those, that we would go out and engage with the nearby landowners to ensure that they're aware of the road and to see if there are any concerns they may have. Just to say here on the floor and to put the member at ease is that the family in question, we are in contact with them. We are in the process of going through valuations and also reviewing all options, and we will continue to work with the family to find a resolution. But to answer him, no, there isn't.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for that answer. Two questions, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister give a timeline for the solution just so the family being affected can have an idea of how long this will take before finding a solution to the number of highlighted issues. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, can the minister say the other residents on Printers Way that have also been affected in what they perceive as negatively because the road was primarily a side road and was not heavily trafficked. Therefore, persons who live on that road found it to be a family-friendly environment. And now, as a result of the opening of the road, has increased and guesstimates, in my mind, over 500% increase in traffic, and now having residents concerned about pedestrian crossing and children playing. Is there any provisions planned for not only the resident at the end of the road, but for the other residents, whether it be speed bumps, whether it be flashing lights, something of that nature to give the ease of concern by the other residents on Printers Way?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me just say to the member that it is my intention to engage, and I have a few of the phone numbers, persons that have called up to engage with the residents in that area to investigate and to offer any solutions or any easements that we can for them. Certainly something that we do through the ministry and at the NRA in all instances, but I'll give the member my undertaking that I will certainly do so.
Last supplementary.
Thank you, Mr.
Member
Speaker.
from Georgetown Central.
I just want to thank the minister for his answers and thank him for having discussions with me about this matter. And I appreciate, and I will hold him to those commitments in respecting to finding a speedy solution for those residents of Printers Way. That's it, Mr. Speaker.
Next question. Call on the Premier to suspend standing orders for questions. Yeah, for questions. Just one left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the suspension of Standing Order 23, 7, and 8 in order that questions may be taken after the hour of interruption.
Question is that standing orders be suspended in order to allow questions to continue after the hour. All in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Next question, please.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honourable Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure. Question number 56.
Mr. Speaker.
Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to withdraw this question as the Minister have addressed the concerns that I had in respect to the question outside of this assembly, and I want to thank him for his assistance in finding the solution to the concerns I had within the question. But to also highlight, though, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister just said in my previous question, the timeline he's given is a 2-month period of estimations for solutions to the previous problem. 2 weeks, even better.
Sorry, is the member withdrawing the question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. I'm not sure whether we need to take a vote on that. I think take it that the member has withdrawn the question. Next item.
Statements by Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet.
I have received a statement from the Honourable Minister of Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the Honourable House, or this Honourable House, will recall that I made a statement during the first meeting of the Legislative Assembly for 2018-2019 in September of last year to share details of work that was being done within the ministry to strengthen the resilience of our communities in response to critical incidents. Mr. Speaker, I stand before you today to confirm that one of the projects mentioned at that time, namely the upgrade of the National Public Safety Communications radio system, has been successfully completed, resulting in the deployment of the state-of-the-art infrastructure and accessories across all 3 islands. Mr. Speaker, all public safety first responders have been issued with new handheld radios and base units, and the Department of Public Safety Communications is working with a small number of non-critical departments and SAGCs to assess their needs for new equipment, which will be issued as necessary. Mr. Speaker, with the upgrade to the new P25 radio system, 911 dispatchers now have state-of-the-art consoles, and there is the capability to locate emergency services personnel with GPS and to send SMS messages to radio handheld. Air and maritime assets now have a much greater range to support search and rescue and other missions. Mr. Speaker, the system can also be adapted easily to accommodate future changes in technology. This marks the achievement of the critical goal of enhanced capability and interoperability for all first responder agencies. Mr. Speaker, to ensure full coverage and seamless communications, 3 new radio transmitter sites were installed in West Bay, Frank Sound, and the west end of Cayman Brac. Testing and training exercises have been conducted with the radio system users, and I am pleased to advise honourable members that the addition of these 3 sites has addressed long-standing gaps in coverage that are critical for robust public safety communications. Mr. Speaker, members will be aware that reliable communication is crucial for effective public safety operations and for the safety of our first responders and those they serve. The successful completion of this project demonstrates this government's ongoing commitment to invest in infrastructure improvements and the implementation of state-of-the-art technology to support agencies in the delivery of critical services to the people of the Cayman Islands. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next item.
Personal explanations.
None.
Obituary and other ceremonial speeches.
None.
Raising of matter of privileges.
None.
Other business.
I am, honourable members, there's no other business as to item 11. Clerk, before we go on to item 12. So as to give the Premier full flow for his delivery of the SPS, I am proposing that we take lunch at this time. So we will do the lunch suspension until 1:30. Until 1:30. The House will suspend proceedings until 1:30, and on our return, government motion and item 12.